So a formal welcome, hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jamie Klein, and I'm the founder and CEO of Inspire Human Resources. And most importantly, I hope that your loved ones are well during this very uncertain time. Welcome to our third session in our series on redesigning the future of work. We redesigned this, we launched this series as a forum for leaders and HR to really join as a community and learn from each other, from key experts who can share their wisdom during this very uncertain time. As I mentioned, Kate Shrinsky will be moderating, and at the last 15 minutes, we'll have time for some Q&A. But what we want to do is really create a forum today around DEI through the entire employee experience. Our last session was on DEI for the modern workplace, and it was a broad discussion sharing of the best and brightest ideas. We had lots of folks come back after and ask for very specific pieces of wisdom on how to do the best sourcing for diverse slates, how to go ahead and make sure that there's DEI woven into training, development, performance conversations, succession planning, and offboarding. So this is a follow-up session to create space to talk about the entire employee experience. We want to make sure that we're able to answer all of your questions. We saw of the 270 plus folks that registered for today's session, we saw lots of familiar faces as well as some new folks as well. So just want to quickly introduce Inspire HR. We're a 36 plus team of HR experts who really hail from all various areas of HR, recruiting, diversity, training, development, coaching, etc. We do quick projects, and we also help with filling in interim roles that might be vacant at kind of Fortune 500 and small companies. And we're a team of people who have really seen it all. But no HR leader has quite seen the likes of this, has quite led an HR organization during the pandemic, not in our lifetime. So again, we want to create this forum where we can come together during these unprecedented times. So to help us through this uncharted territory, I'm joined by three of Inspire's DEI colleagues, Dave Ciliberto, Sandra Garcia, and Ricky Jasper. And I'm delighted to have this treasure trove of wisdom here with us today. Dave Ciliberto is an educator and consultant in the DEI space. Between teaching at Cornell's ILR program at their school and directly working with C-suite leaders and various teams, his focus is really on connecting the business case, which is the marketplace, the workplace, and the workforce, to really understand the many intersectional lenses and organizational alignment. Sandra Garcia combines a background in DEI leadership with sales and marketing to create and execute DEI initiatives. She's worked at organizations like Facebook, Toyota, Estee Lauder, Apple, Sephora, Pepsi, Amex, and she's really a recognized speaker on the intersectional pieces of DEI. She's also the founder of consulting agency EncounterYourPotential.com, as well as AfroLatinaBeauty.com, which is an online destination of stories for Afro-Latinas to share their intercultural experiences. So definitely check that out. And Ricky Jasper is a senior leader. He hails 30 years from the CIA, spanning his career there. Across the 30 years, 8 of his years were really focused on DEI initiatives within the agency. He has served as a senior executive and a special advisor to the director of the CIA on DEI plans and programs. In addition, has helped with various programs throughout the employee life cycle. He also led the Strategic Talent Resource Management Office, where he designed and oversaw things throughout the employee life cycle. So we are in great hands with this panel of experts. And so with that, I would love to dive right in. And the first question that we had is, when you think about the entire employee experience, the entire employee life cycle, kind of from recruiting through onboarding, I'd love to hear from all of you if there are specific opportunities that jump to mind for you, kind of actions we can take to really help create more of a culture of inclusion. So Sandra, Dave, Ricky, who would like to begin?
Okay, I can get started. First of all, just glad to be a part of this here conversation today. Exciting times for all of us, different time, unique time. But inclusion, as far as creating a culture of inclusion, when you look at the life cycle of the employee, from onboarding to development to training to assessment, promotion, offboarding, et cetera, the whole process, there's a number of opportunities. I think you need to be, one thing I would point out is to ensure that you not get focused on the invitation and be really focused on inclusion, because there's a major difference in that. And if you're not careful, if you invite people, I'll give you an example. If you invite people to the table or invite people to the room, that's different than including them in the meetings. So to include them, and if you have to look at each process differently, but there are opportunities throughout the life cycle of the employee to be able to affect the inclusiveness. One thing that we discovered at the agency that was critically important for us was the area of mentoring. As you know, because of the business, because of the secrecy, the sensitivity and operation of the intelligence community and the CIA specifically, there's some things that you don't learn outside of the organization. So having a mentoring program that was focused on the employee, bringing them in, inculcating them, getting them incorporated to the organization, proved to be critically important. And it allowed them the opportunity to be able to affect them, to let them know who we were, both the written and the unwritten portion of it. Now, we expanded the program and we facilitated this to ensure that the leaders were included as well. We had group mentoring programs for our leaders because, as we all know, leadership involvement in programs are critically important. So what we did, because their time is valuable, we set a program where they could group mentor small groups, 5 to 10, on a bi-weekly or monthly basis, to ensure that they have time to engage employees, to have conversation, et cetera, et cetera. So we formalized the program, mentoring, because that was a critical piece. It's an inexpensive way for organizations to really affect and let people know that they are a part. Because think about it, if they get an opportunity to talk to a leader, think about a junior officer talking to a leader of the organization, the impact that will have on making them feel like they're a part of the organization.
Ricky,
Thank you.
I love that. I love it. And I love talking to you. I was like, I'm talking to James Bond, like I'm understanding the inner workings of the CIA. So when I think about that mentoring program, what I love is that it creates that safe space for people to ask those questions. And I love what you said, understand the written and unwritten, which I think is sometimes even more important. Dave, thoughts from you?
Well, thank you. And it is awesome to be here with my esteemed colleagues. To build on what Ricky said, he's describing how infrastructure is critical for keeping talent, right? And creating safe space, as you mentioned, Jamie. In the poll that all the participants just participated in, recruiting was the highest percentage. So looking at recruiting as an employee lifecycle event and how to get DEI connected, one of the things I used to do in an investment bank when I ran diversity was I would always leverage the employee resource groups with colleges and universities for entry-level hires, and other organizations for mid-level and higher-level hires. So we would create a comfortable, safe environment by getting to know through relationships and supporting colleges and universities, helping do resumes, affinity group to affinity group, ERG to ERG, so that we've already established rapport. And starting out in the recruiting process, internships, critical. And there are a lot of diverse colleges and universities to participate in internships to start the ball rolling. And the whole thing about the ERGs is, I always love meeting with them once a quarter with my talent acquisition team to then talk about all the job openings and get a diverse slate of candidates through all the ERGs. So employer referral program, increase in diverse slate of candidates, typically great talent to bring into the organization, and it's also a metrics that you can use.
Great. I love that. ERGs, I think, are like the secret sauce to organizations. I find that they're often like an early detection warning system for anything that's off, and also just to, again, create more of that safe space in those intimate conversations. Sandra, thoughts from you? I know when we met, you spoke about this concept of the frozen middle. I'd love if you could share that with the group.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to feed off of what Ricky shared and then also what Dave shared. So Ricky talked about mentoring, and then Dave talked about the infrastructure for keeping talent. And I want to go and take that a level further. And let's talk about training also, and the development of talent, but not just talent, but our leaders. And one area of opportunity I strongly believe is the frozen middle. So what's the frozen middle? The frozen middle refers to middle managers, those who are in between, the bridge between entry level and then those leaders that Ricky mentioned. Would be amazing if you have junior officers talking to leaders. So the frozen middle is inspiring or aspiring to become leaders, but they're also that gap and that voice, and also the executors within organizations that carry out the vision of our leaders. So if we can invest in training them, developing their soft skills so that they can really carry out the vision of our leaders when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that can make humongous change. And also it can help to also groom that entry-level talent into middle management so we can see more diverse candidates also in senior level positions. So Jamie, you are on mute, I believe.
Thank you. I just gotten a note in the chat that folks could not hear my audio, but you definitely cannot hear my audio if I'm on mute. So I just adjusted my audio. You'll let me know if you can hear me better.
I can hear you now.
Love it, love it. So gotta love this, doing Zoom calls in this moment in time. We're all winging it. So Sandra, I love what you spoke when we spoke about the frozen middle. I think that that's just a great concept where a lot of people stall. And also a lot of organizations cannot retain their talent. So that's a time to really invest. So as we think about the employee experience, many firms that we've heard from specifically since early June have talked about refreshing their whole recruiting or talent acquisition process, very much wanting to attract more diverse slates. And I'm so curious, with all the wisdom on this panel, what are what are the best and brightest companies out there doing to attract and diverse slates and really groom that talent to enter the organization? Dave, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. Great question, especially now during this pandemic. One of the organizations that we work with through Inspire are one of my favorites, Radian. They have a process when you open a job rec that the hiring manager is sent links to sourcing bias, unconscious bias. They're also sent links to behavioral interview questions. So we're setting folks up for success to try to avoid typical biases that maybe are unconscious until they're conscious. The other thing we look at is job descriptions wording. And the most important thing about that is literally there are tons of software. This one company, On Gig, now I'm not promoting them because I haven't bought it, but they have a text analyzer for job descriptions, and not just gender related words like, assertive, aggressive is not a gender friendly word, but influential is. So looking at the words in job descriptions is really critical to attract a wide range of talent. The other thing that this organization does through their text analyzer is unconscious bias and biased words, like what really, as far as I'm concerned in my community, LGBTQ, what turns me away from a job description? What words are used that I sense is a trigger or uncomfortable? So I think the job description is a great starting point, but also those prompters for hiring managers to be reminded of, we're all human, we all have the biases. Here's a reminder, pay attention, and here's the process we're going to follow. Educate yourself again every time you have a job opening to keep them fresh in your mind. And the one thing I always talk about is that, that sweaty palm, limp handshake, that people have, and for me, that is a bias, because most job descriptions don't require a non-sweaty handshake nor a firm handshake, right? But our reaction is, ugh. So when we have that reaction, are we shutting down, listening to whatever they have to say and want to get the interview over with? It's a critical point of how open are we and aware of non-job descriptors based on competencies that I'm looking at. There is no competency for that. So if I don't have competencies defined in my job description, then behavioral interview questions of those competencies, I am not being fair to all the candidates that are interviewing. And if I'm asking candidates different questions, I also cannot compare their candidacy competitively because I've asked different questions. Consistency is really important.
It's great. Dave, I love that. And you and I have spoken with many of our clients about how just because we're human, by human nature, we're just drawn to people that remind us of our fabulous self, right? So when we ask these consistent questions throughout, we can really move through that bias. I was thinking as you were answering that about Radian, and they're doing such beautiful work there. Another one of our clients in the media space have a practice that As soon as a job rec comes through to talent acquisition, they say, happy to post it. Just want to confirm, have you taken our class on reducing bias and in interview? And if not, no problem. Just send me a screenshot when you've completed that online course. Happy to post your rec. Again, kind of that trigger to make sure that that is in place for hiring leaders. Ricky, Sandra, thoughts that come to mind from you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent some time leading the New York chapter of NAMIC, which is the National Association for Multi-Ethnicities in Communication. And I worked with a lot of organizations in assisting their recruiting process. So with this, I would have to say, just like we're intentional with our sales strategies, our marketing strategies, we also need to be super intentional with a talent acquisition strategy, which means that we need to be proactive and not reactive. And that helps to reduce, like me, bias, because you are planning so that you're not at the last minute looking for references in social circles, but really looking out into the marketplace and looking for talent proactively, even if we're poaching them from other competitive organizations. And two things that we can do to be super strategic, I'm gonna share an internal example and then also an external example. So external audience targeting. So again, I am a sales and marketer, and I approach diversity, equity, and inclusion with a sales and marketing hat. So external audience targeting, you have to be where your target audience is. So if you see there's a pocket of opportunity, or there is an audience that you're looking to attract more of, whether it's diverse backgrounds, diverse lifestyles, diverse age, gender, race, it can be several different things. There are conferences, there are events, there are workshops, there are seminars. You need to be where your audience is to proactively engage with them. And then also build a relationship to potentially win them over.
I want to do everything that you said. I love all of those ideas. I think it's fantastic. Ricky, thoughts from you?
So let me say, just ditto to everything that's been said. And I would say, in looking at the great companies that do this, they do that. But one of the things, when you start talking about the conversation of diversity as it relates to recruitment, it's very easy to have that slide in the conversation go towards quotas. And people feel like we can't do quotas. But the real issue is, if you make it a business case, one of the things that we did, if you make it a business case, if diversity and inclusion is critical to the mission of your organization, and you have a business case, then you can take the action you need to take to ensure that these things that we've talked about are being done. Advertisement, you do advertise, everything needs to be focused, deliberate, and committed to what you're after. So once you make the business case, I think one of the things we did well was we made the business case for diversity. Then we were able to look at what were we trying to do, who were we trying to recruit. Then we could address those areas that were working and not working, make changes where it needs to be, and ensure that we get the necessary population and throughout the organization. So the business case, I think, is critical.
Absolutely. And some of the clients that we work with also have gone so far to link it to the the goals of the organization about making sure that you can connect with shareholder, understanding your customer.
Right.
So that it feels clearly like more of a business imperative. So let's go to the next step in the employee journey, the employee experience beyond recruiting. I'd love to hear your wisdom on best and brightest ideas out there. Once that talent's in the door, how do we look through that DEI lens and improve things like training, development, performance conversations, succession planning? Sandra, we can start with thoughts from you.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to mix my answer with another internal strategy, which also relates to training. So you can also have multi-layered, purposeful recruiting strategies that can also serve as internal training and career development. So for example, if you're looking to hire a greater pool of diverse engineers, for example, you can highlight someone internally who's doing amazing work, create a career or professional development event around it internally, where you can skill up, train up, and provide that mentorship kind of environment for your internal employees, while also, when we can play outside once again, invite external recruits that fit the bill so that you can invite and also grow your pool of diverse candidates. So that can kill two birds with one stone with a multi-layered purposeful recruiting event, and then also internal professional development and career development event.
I love it. And if at any point folks have any creative ideas during this time when we cannot play outside, as you said, any innovative ways to, to respond during this period when we are limited, to sit down with someone and break bread or get to see their body language. I always say you learn as much from your talent in terms of how they treat junior folks to how they treat senior folks. And it's just hard during this time to not see people kind of interacting with one another. Ricky, thoughts from you?
This area is interesting because I call this, if we do the 3 I's, not the 5 I's, but the 3 I's, and that is identify what's working. And if we're having the conversation about there being a disparity in your diversity issues, that's for an example, that suggests that something is working and something is not working. Understanding what's working and taking a look into how it's working, who it's working for is critical. One of the things we discovered in the organization when looking at diversity, there were programs, like say training development program, we call them, some of them we term quota courses, specific courses designed for our leaders that proved to be incredibly successful. For individuals who had the opportunity to take those programs. When we looked a little bit deeper into the programs, the participation level for minorities were minimal. And as a result, they were not being as successful on the front line of getting promoted. So what we decided to do is, if you open up that aperture and allow more people into the program, almost by default, you get a better result as far as promotion to the next level, advancement, et cetera. So part of it is, the first thing is identify what's working, because clearly in organizations, there are things that are working very well. Second is be inclusive. Expand it to include additional people, as I mentioned earlier, that are maybe not a part of the program right now, maybe not people that you automatically know. You may have to expand and look into the organization who's really prepared, equipped, qualified, or whatever for the position, and then invest in the future. Don't just allow what you're doing be your only answer. Be creative enough to look to the future. How do you want to look as an organization? What things do you need to do differently that may take more time to get done, but they're worth investing into? So look at the present, accept where you are, make some necessary changes to include people, and then invest in your future.
It's great. I love that. The 3 I's. Dave, thoughts from you? Training,
Sure.
development. Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite arenas, training, learning and development. And this is one of the things we always talk about: systemic change, and people get a little tangled up in systemic. That sounds so huge. It can be as simple as, how effective is your training on unconscious bias related to workflow? And to Ricky's point, understanding where you are presently, most of the training that we do, Inspire and mine at Cornell, is find out from the people in the workshops what things are going well from a workplace perspective on inclusion and engagement, and what things need focus. And it's an activity in every workshop I do to get inside scoop. It's a mini climate assessment in addition to an engagement survey. The other thing is, for systemic change, what do you do with that training? What do you do with that action plan? Every training course must have an action plan, whether it's a Stephen Covey, what will I stop? What will I start? What will I continue to do? What will I do differently? Or if it's more detailed of an action plan on my key learnings for self to implement, key learnings for our organization to consider and implement. These are all tools to keep the momentum going and create systemic change. And when leaders in staff meetings say, give me a 3-minute on what you learned from that workshop you went to. And it's a standard in a staff meeting of every leader in all organizations, from the top down, C-suite down, then now you're creating systemic change of incorporating learning and implementing those actions, which will change behaviors, which will increase engagement and inclusion. So, and Ricky mentioned the business case. This is definitely a core of the business case, that what we do related to inclusion and diversity. And I usually say inclusion and diversity because inclusion is a choice. We make a choice to include or exclude. Diversity is a fact. We are all diverse. When you hear diverse candidates, diverse slate, we're all diverse. Doesn't matter what you look like. We have our own lens and our own experiences, and that we grew up with and that we learned, and that we actually fight against those biases that we learned and conditioned. So we bring a unique lens to what we do, and it's how to harness that. So we recognize that everybody is diverse from their perspective, and that adds diversity of thought and brainstorming and solutions to systemic issues in an organization. And that's where I love systemic change. And you can start small. How do you pick up where training leaves off? And there's an article I'm just going to mention that's going to be in the chat from Harvard Business Review, and it's Update Your DE&I Playbook. And what they talk about is how there are disparities in measuring employees through performance. And what are those disparities? Well, how does one have to prove oneself if you are in a category of diverse demographic versus non, right? And there are bias interrupters. So it's a really interesting article recently that just came out from Harvard Business Review, but it gives you some systemic ways to impact change.
It's great. The bias disruptors, I love that. It's interesting, and I love that HBR article. You and I, Kate Shrinsky, who's moderating, we're all American Express alum. And I thought Amex did a beautiful job. For me, they're kind of one of the best and brightest companies out there. Can you comment on the performance evaluation process at Amex? I think it's really best in class. How really weaves in the diversity piece to their, the way that they evaluate performance over time.
Yes. So the two measures for American Express are literally your technical expertise and your leadership ability. So how do you achieve results as well as achieving your results? And this is the one thing I loved about working at American Express was you're measuring my relationship skills, my emotional intelligence lens, and do I have it or are there gaps? As well as I may be excellent at what I do technically, and that's a silo. So can I bridge out to lead others, to influence others, to develop others, to mentor others based on the leadership category and my emotional intelligence? So there's a lot within two ratings from American Express, which is one of the best places I've worked on as far as a wide range of inclusive engagement and diversity perspectives.
And within that leadership rating, there's a whole evaluation specifically on diversity. So as many of you have heard me say over time, I'm like a results junkie, and I just believe what gets measured gets done. So to think that the year-end evaluation links directly to compensation is huge, right? I think that that's such a big driver for folks beyond it just kind of being the right thing to do. So we talked about recruiting, talent, development, performance management. I want to touch on that last stage, which is offboarding. And offboarding doesn't always feel like it gets the focus that it deserves. So I'd love some ideas from each of you on what inclusion looks like at this last phase as we're really kind of parting ways with someone. What is it, what is it? It's like if you have a positive experience in life, you tell 3 people. If you have a negative experience, you tell 7, right? So with that in mind, would love some thoughts. So Sandra, our communications expert, I start with you. What are some things to keep in mind as people are parting from an organization?
Yes, I think we definitely need to place a lot more value to what is said in an exit interview. Because at this point, whoever worked for your organization has very little to lose. So they're a lot more honest than when they're trying to impress that person who controls their take home. So what is said during an exit interview definitely needs to be taken into account when potentially implementing change as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially. Because what is the reason that we know a lot of people leave their organizations? Because of bad experiences with managers. And how can we influence that? So again, like you said, Jamie, when someone has a bad experience, they tell a lot more people than when potentially could be a great experience. And where we see that a lot is Glassdoor and Glassdoor reviews, which then also impacts the recruiting process. So it really is a life cycle, and that offboarding process definitely impacts the onboarding process, those who you're able to attract, and also the questions that come up during the onboarding and interviewing process.
I love what you said. People do have nothing to lose on their way out, and sometimes that's where we learn so much. I know we spoke about the concept even of stay interviews. In a previous conversation, the idea of kind of talking to your top talent while they're in the organization and asking, why do you stay? What do you love about working here? And what can we continue to do to make sure that that we can work together as colleagues for as long as possible? Dave, thoughts from you?
Sure. Well, dignity is what comes to mind. And how do we provide dignity to someone we're exiting? And it's literally to be able to acknowledge the duration of time, and the impact that they made, because these are all literally financial decisions based on closing down businesses and reorganizing businesses and changing jobs. So dignity is critical. And I'll say from my other hat, I was, in charge of career transition for a consulting firm, Partners International, for a number of years, that having a firm that helps support you in the career search, that gives you hope. And I think that these partnerships I had, and when I worked with Jen Welty at BNP Paribas, we were always on site when they were doing any exits. And we were there to support the process, but also support the individual and provide hope. Not right at the moment, but here's how we'll help you. Your organization's taking care of this. We will take care of you personally, and we will help you find what's next, if that's what you're looking for. And I think this combination of partnership, it takes many lenses to assist people. And I think having a dignified exit, recognizing contributions, and also support for the future is really critical.
Right, and in that, Dave, I hear there's really a mental health care piece, not as a therapist, but more just to create space to make sure that they do have a soft landing and that there is a sounding board on their way out. And at this moment in time that we find our in, my sense is that we are really moving towards a mental health crisis in our country as people kind of, we're 6 months, into the pandemic. Obviously, unemployment is sky high. There's just so many pieces. Lots of families are trying to navigate juggling work and home, etc. The list goes on. So with that, I think that especially in these times when we're moving towards onboarding, keeping that special focus, the attention that is deserved on that soft landing and that sounding board. Ricky, thoughts from you on the offboarding process with the DEI lens?
Say for repeating what Sandra and Dave said, I think this is the key area, because I mean, when Sandra mentioned the fact that this comes full circle, I mean, there are 2 times I think you make a major impression on anybody, your first impression and your last impression. Regardless of why people leave, having retired from the organization after 30-something years, I was a part of the process of offboarding individuals. And I saw people with careers that were sterling and some not so sterling, but we had an opportunity to engage the individuals and talk with them and see what their experiences were. The knowledge, you talked about learning organization, the knowledge you gather from employees who are leaving, for resigning or retiring is invaluable. I say this is the time that you can affect your organization, your diversity inclusion, and you can do what I call FAST. F is feedback. What is their story? Hear from them and understand what it is, what they're telling you, because again, as Sandra said, they have nothing to lose. And then it's A is assessment. How did the organization affect them? Ask support. Tell the truth. You tell others the truth about us. When they can leave the organization, they're going to tell others their experience. What a force multiplier they can be if you leave them with a good taste in their mouth. And last is to say thanks. How much does it cost to really say just thank you? Thank you goes a long way. Someone said love causes a multitude of fault. If you say thank you to an individual for their time at the organization, you'd be surprised at the impact that will have, allowing them to even forget things that were necessarily bad if they had bad experiences, and affect them in a very positive way. So we discovered, and I would say we were not quick on this year to set this program in place, but later in our later years, we put this in place and started to understand and see the impact. Offboarding is as critical as onboarding employees.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Christina in the chat just talked about that is known as the Whisper Network, right? Just kind of your brand being out there. So we're going to go to Q&A in just about 3 minutes. So if you can get your questions ready in the chat. But the last question and I could literally talk to the 3 of you all day on this, but the last question I want to ask, if someone is with us and they're literally listening right now, and they feel that their company is positive intent, but might not be as strong at promoting DEI as they would like to, where do they even begin? This feels sometimes like a mountain that is so darn hard to climb. What are some things that they can do to really set the table and lay that groundwork? Sandra, I'd love thoughts from you.
Yeah, and I want to take this back to training also, and in terms of just setting the tone and the culture of organizations. And we talked about development and training, and I think it really has to be top down. And Dave touched on that. So right now, especially as there's a lot of unconscious bias training happening, a lot of microaggression, stereotype training. But I think our senior leaders also need a refresher, maybe not training, right? But just like in school, before the teacher can teach her students or her or his students, they have to be informed and they have to know how to execute. And before, I think middle management, entry level, whatever level of the organization is being trained on anything, I think senior leadership also needs to be held accountable. So I think that, for example, right now, this is something we know it's happening. If there are trainings happening, also advocate for senior leadership to either be a part of that or ask, hey, has senior leadership gotten a refresher of this as well?
It's great. And someone was just saying in the chat, speaking of training, we want to think about mental health support, not just during offboarding, but during the entire employee life cycle, just given the moment that we find ourselves in. Dave, thoughts from you on how to set that table and just even get things started if you want to do more in your organization?
Sure. I mean, having a voice is critical. So being heard, really important. And if there's not a vehicle in your organization to be heard, then I will say go to who you trust. If you have a mentor, if you're comfortable with HR, and voice an opinion on what you think can be done. The best formula is top down, as Sandra mentioned, C-suite down and grassroots up. So usually employee resource groups, as I referenced earlier, are grassroots up, but championing comes from leaders. And one of the drivers of inclusion and diversity is senior leadership championing. So getting them on board is critical. And if you're looking right now at organizations, having the right power. So a CEO, a C-suite, they have the right power to influence and cascade and give direction. And a lot of organizational leaders are like, I'm not sure what to do. Tell me what to do, which one of my favorite things. Of course, I'm happy to tell you what to do. So to guide them, and especially willing audiences, it's really important that you have a multitude of lenses hearing from people that work in your organization on what it is that's important to them to focus on. This is where when we do focus groups with employees after an engagement survey, we really get the nitty gritty of what was going through your mind when you answered negatively to this question or positively to that question. And these are things to harness to create movement, evolution, progression. So I think having a voice is important and speaking up, and we need the courage to do that. And I think currently we're in the right environment for that to happen, so we do not lose the momentum that's been happening in our socio-political environment currently. We need to keep the momentum going by continually speaking up about what's important to us and the impact of people, not their intention, their impact of their words and actions. This is what creates behavior change.
Absolutely, to really create a movement. It's so many clients since really around June 1st with this overdue focus in our country on racial inequity have reached out to ask us to do listening tours, to hold space in sometimes in large kind of almost town hall sessions on Zoom, but also, Dave, as you said, in small intimate settings, almost like a focus group where we can kind of create a safe space to really understand from employees, specifically employees who are Black people, kind of understand what it has been like for them within that organization and hear what our blind spots are and what else we can do. Ricky, thoughts from you?
So I think I'll do a rhyme on this one. Hire, inspire. Okay, how'd I do? Hire, inspire. The reality of this is when you look at the challenge you have here is it's an opportunity. But one size does not fit all. When you look at the question that we put out, what is your greatest opportunity for improvement regarding DEI? 40% said onboarding at some point here. Offboarding was 9%. Career development. Each company has a different area to look at, an optic that's different. So you have to recognize what's taking place in your organization. And do that, as Dave and Sandra said, communication, you've got to connect. You got to have a conversation with your organization, understand what are the issues affecting your organization. And then after you see what they are, then proceed to identify what course of action should be taken. The worst thing you could do is just begin to do what everyone else is doing, because you can spend a lot of time doing something that gets you absolutely nothing.
Or even tarnishes the brand, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the thing that we've heard from so many organizations, that they have very well-intentioned leaders who went forward and said something or posted something on social, and it just sounded so tone deaf to their employees. And then hashtag hire inspire, they called and said, hey, can you lend a hand? We just want to go ahead and ask for grace from our employees. We want to try this again. And we now need to do a listening tour. So with that, would love to hop into the chat. And Kate, as I hand it over to you to share some of our questions, I just want to say that when my leadership team and I huddled about 2 weeks ago and realized that there were so many questions around how to really look at the entire employee experience through the DEI lens. There was a dialogue around, well, do we do it at the end of August? Don't most people look to kind of do holiday or take time off with family towards the end of August? I don't know. And we thought, well, let's just try it. There's so much conversation out there. And even if like 12 people gather, it'll still be a good discussion. We literally had over 270 people register for this. So it's just great to see such momentum. And I know that there is a lot of desire. So I think we're going to do a follow-up session with all of you, if it's okay, on September 9th as kind of a part 2, just to keep the conversation going. So with that, Kate, I hand you over to you to share some of the questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jamie. We have a bunch of really good questions, so I'm hoping we can get through the majority of them. I'll start with one that's fairly straightforward. Donna asked, how do you get unwilling leaders to take the exit interviews seriously instead of saying, oh, that's just them? I thought, Sandra, you might have a good answer to that one.
Oh, man. You know, one of the hardest things is people management, right? That it's not always the work that we're doing, but really influencing the people that we're working around. So a few strategies before we even get to that exit interview. I would say Jamie kind of, she hinted at it, a stay interview and then also a keep interview, right? So if we have HR leaders here with us today, these are 2 things we can do before the exit interview that we can also add in to our HR strategies so that we can hopefully prevent these exit interviews. So stay interviews on an annual basis, as we're also looking at goals and reviews. We can also say, hey, what's your experience with the organization? What's going well and what's not going well? Also with that, 360 reviews, so that you're also getting input from the folks that report directly into you, but then also the folks who are maybe working next to you and then also above you. And then another thing that Google does is a keep interview. So I work really closely with Google, and if there are employees who are at jeopardy of leaving, maybe someone who has put in and mentioned that they're leaving, they're going to another organization or thinking about leaving, what can we do for you so you can stay? Someone also mentioned older employees. And another retention strategy is also keeping people on board as advisors or as consultants, because people are not always leaving to go somewhere else. Maybe they just want flexibility. People are at different places in life. So that's another option. Another retention option is keeping people on as consultants or advisors.
I love that. So great, especially with so many folks at a late stage in their career wanting to very much stay engaged and work even after retirement. So it's a great idea.
Great, thanks, Sandra. Okay, here's another question from Ellen. She says, buy-in from leadership is really the toughest part. Do we have metrics on how DEI improvement positively impacts companies' financial performance? And how do we shift the conversation past money? Ricky, do you want to take a stab at that?
So, you know, coming from the government and not having a bottom line, it's an interesting question. But having said that, we made diversity mission critical. And that, our bottom line was the intelligence gathering. We needed diversity in our organization, throughout our organization, and the 9/11 Commission determined for us doing 9/11, you all recall 9/11, that we failed because we lacked diversity in our leadership. When you make diversity critical to your mission and you see the value of diversity, the impact it can have on the bottom line, but more so, you think if someone said a happy employee is a productive employee, we spend most of our waking hours in the work environment. If people are engaged in what they're doing, the impact of what they're doing, it changes. Organizations that are successful realize this and they do it very well. So when you can move away from the bottom line. So I say what we did was we used statistics to get the conversation into the cerebral cortex. We use stats to say, here's what we're looking at, here's the impact of what's taking place, but that was just to get people engaged in the conversation, but we moved quickly off the numbers and got to what I call, we had the effect of getting from the head to the hearts and then to the hands. You get to the head to say, this is logically, this just makes good logical business sense. But then let's get to the heart. This is the right thing to do. And then let's get to the hand. Let's get people actively involved in making the change that we know that we should actually be making.
I love that.
Great. All right. One other question. So this is going back to the recruitment side. So JD asked, I'd like to know if employee referrals are ever seen as potentially harmful. It can perpetuate the culture fit and close off many from getting their resume even looked at if their employee referrals have priority. Dave, could you take a stab at that one?
Sure. So, is there a risk? Sure, there is. And it all depends on, again, back to your talent acquisition process, right? Like, I love employee referrals, but the minute you refer someone, it's up to the talent acquisition team to determine competitiveness and qualifications based on the interview, based on the resume, and decide what's next. So, as far as the slant goes, the wider your source, the better the talent you have to interview. And I would say it's worth the risk for achieving some talent focus on sourcing. And that's the biggest sort of misidentifier. People feel that they have priority schools, Schedule A, Schedule B, where they come from. So if you're going to mix in with employee referrals, and if you have employee resource groups, you do have a wider source of a diverse candidate slate. But your job description, your interview process, how you determine competitiveness through a logical, analytical process is critical, because it has to be fair and equitable. We want to audit and look at DEI lens for policies, programs, and processes. Talent acquisition recruiting is a process. So are your hiring managers all trained? Do they have the right skills? So I think that the risk is worth it if there's a chance that you can widen your source. And we did see some, all right, pushy employer referrals, like, where's my person? Did you interview? What's going on? You're like, that's up to us to decide. Thank you for the referral. If they get hired, you will know, and you will get your reward if they stay 3 months. So having clear boundaries on who owns what work product is really important.
About that, thank you. Okay, we have one from Anita who says, thanks to Inspire's guidance, thank you, Anita. Radian is making great progress in enhancing our recruiting process. One topic I'd like to hear further about is D&I out across the board, or is DEI critical to reference as an acronym in our initiative? I'll put that out there, whoever would like to jump in first.
Okay, so what's in a name, right? So I would say, how do you attract interest in your organization by the titles you use? Like, for example, none of my workshops are unconscious bias workshops. The content is, but it's literally about leadership. It's about understanding lens and the impact our lens has on business and personal decisions, or inclusive leader workshops. But the content, unconscious bias, because it's critical. So I think words are impactful. Right now there's been a trend because of the current movement. Inequity is clear as a bell on what goes on in society and impacts organizations. So organizations now are looking at, diversity and inclusion as well as equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, equity. So those 3 words permeate. I'm a believer that we're all diverse. So I want to make sure that we choose inclusion and we leverage our differences as strengths, and we want equitable processes. So, this is where, as far as a movement goes, I like the DEI focus. I also like the inclusion first. And I think that part of this is understanding the context of your organization and their readiness level. What are they ready to hear? I will tell you this, that when I used the word diversity in the past, and in my Cornell teachings, we are changing the dynamic of using diversity first. And that's not to lessen the focus on looking at differences as strengths, but it's about how do I engage the most people? And I will say that some people said, yeah, diversity doesn't relate to me. They don't see themselves as diverse until we discuss lens and background and history from a personal point of view. So I think readiness level of your organization will determine the right words to use. And it's an evolution. We started with diversity, then we add inclusion, now we're adding equity, right? So this evolution is awesome to be as encompassing as possible for people to perform their best, being authentically who they are at work as far as performance goes.
That's a great way for us to pause. Jamie, I know we have about 4 minutes left. We can ask another question or we can start to wrap up given the time.
Yeah, I would just say I could literally talk to this group all day. Kate, let's do one more just to kind of leave with some additional wisdom.
Okay, sounds good. So Ricky, I'll direct this one at you and we'll do a quick answer if possible. Diversity actions based on race or other discriminating factors can be deemed illegal, as was recently noted in a ruling against Yale. How do you navigate this gray area of running diversity metrics and taking actions within a legally accepted framework?
Oh, that is a very interesting. I made a career. I'm going to be short. I made a career out of doing this because I often engage lawyers on a regular basis to have this conversation. Because when we start to talk about, we were doing things in our organization for majority officers that we were not allowed to do for minority officers because it was viewed as illegal. So the idea is get the facts together. The best case is get the facts together and start to have a conversation. Dave said earlier, you have to know the readiness of the organization. So sometimes you have to know who's who in the dynamics, have the conversation, get your facts out there, and then start to have the conversation. It is an area you will eventually get into it because we start talking about business terms like what good measures matters. But as soon as you start having the conversation around diversity, we start to say whether or not it's illegal. So it is a slippery slope, but it's one that you really do have to have, and you really have to come up with a strategic way to kind of have that conversation. We managed to do it by, again, pulling all of this stats together, all of the data together, putting it in front of the lawyers, making a request. This is what we want to do. We understand the concerns about how do we go about doing it. I know your first answer is we're not going to be able to do it. Then tell me, how do we go about accomplishing this? Because sometimes it's not, you can get to the same place a different way. So engaging people and identifying the way to get there is a key part of it.
Mm-hmm. And here it is from our internal James Bond. I always feel like we're getting, all right. So Ricky, Dave, Sandra, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Look forward to a part 2 of this conversation on September 9th. Really thank everyone for coming. If you have questions, feel free to always get us on hello@inspiredhumanresources.com. And in the meantime, I thank you for being here, and I hope that your loved ones continue to stay healthy during these times of uncertainty. Be well, and thanks so much. Take care.